Namaste, everybody. Welcome to Environment Week. For the first time, the Sriram School Aravali is organizing an Environment Week, which will be a 1 week long activity. Over this 1 week, we have had several events, both inter-house and individual. The inter-house events we had were inter-house debate, which was a fruitful debate on environment topics that have no definite answer. The second was a Shark Tank business proposal event. And the aim of this event was so that children can come up with their own business plans that explain youth led solutions to the SDG assigned to the particular house.
The individual events were a DIY upcycling event, and the aim of this event is to turn simple, everyday items into something new by upcycling them. The second was an original song composition, and the aim of this event was to help students hone their singing skills while learning more about the environment. And the third individual activity was a filmmaking competition. The aim of this event is to help students hone their filmmaking skills while learning more about the environment. The results for all of these will be announced on October 8th.
Now I would like to hand over to the Secretaries of Environment who will carry you forward. Thank you.
Namaste. My name is Nandika Sharma.
I am Sachika Motani, and both of us are your Environment Secretaries for this academic year.
As introduced by Aditya and Veer, Environment Debate and Shark Tank were two inter-house events, whereas DIY, filmmaking, and song composition were either individual or team events.
The environment debate was conducted in an Oxford-style format. Each house team consisted of 3 members, one being the backup. All houses put on a great debate, and it was really enjoyable and informative to watch.
In the semi-finals, Srishti went against Vasundhara, whereas Himgiri went against Sagar.
Sagar and Srishti made it to the finals, whereas Vasundhara and Himgiri debated for 3rd place. The finals were judged by Kamaljeet Ma'am, Parth Mahajan, and Veer Sani.
Here are the team members of each house, followed by the final environment debate. I'd like to reiterate the motion is this house believes that production of honey is unethical and should be banned. Good luck to both teams.
We will start with Shrishti as Shrishti's proposition. I'm going to screen share my timer. Please let me know who the first speaker is and when I can begin.
Right, so I'll be going first as a first speaker.
Okay, please say 3, 2, 1, I'll stop.
Right, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right, I shall start in 3, 2, 1. Greetings to the House at large. The motion that lies before us today is that production of honey is unethical and should be banned. Today, we will prove to the House why production of honey needs to be banned. Firstly, the cruelty of the process of production of honey, and secondly, the greed of humans in consuming another animal's food source are the two main constructors. Let me begin by defining the production of honey. Production of honey is an extremely cruel and inhumane process of stealing an insect's life source and food to provide a consumable food source which can easily be replaced. The burden lying on side proposition is that other sweeteners are not unethical, and the burden that lies on side opposition is that honey is extremely essential for human health and there is no other better replacement. The main stakeholders of today's debates are the millions of innocent bees that are being exploited. Coming to my constructives, first, many beekeepers take inhumane and cruel steps to ensure personal safety and reach production quotas. It's not unusual for larger honey producers to cut off the queen bee's wings so that she can't leave the colony, or to have her artificially inseminated, which is an extremely brutal and callous method to provide food for humans. In addition to that, honey is not necessary for consumption of humans. It has a similar GI level as sugar, hence the possible health benefits do not outweigh the methods of production in any aspect. On the other hand, sweeteners such as rice syrup, maple syrup, etc. are not harmful to any aspect of the environment and can easily replace honey in a human's daily life. Second, the basic incentive for the production of honey is money for the farmers. Now, let me tell you what this money-making scheme consists of. It consists of the exploitation of millions of bees, which scientists associate with pesticide poisoning, which then results in the spread to thousands of other pollinators that we and other animals rely on, disputing the common myth that honey production is good for the environment, which means it is not good for the environment. Why should humans so blatantly and callously harm these tiny insects who essentially have no rule over their own lives, when we ourselves can replace honey with other sweeteners which were mentioned before? There is absolutely no reasoning behind the production of honey, and this is why side proposition believes that the production of honey is unethical and should be banned. My second speaker will further express the points put forward by me. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's the next speaker from Sagar?
That would be me. All right, 1 second. I will start in 3. Wait, am I audible first?
Yes.
Yes,
All right, great. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Greetings to the House at large. Now, today I'll be arguing against the motion that the production of honey is unethical and should be banned. Now, to start off, we want to maintain the stance that we believe in the ethical treatment of bees and that we should incentivize the removal of harmful practices. So here's our burden. Entirely banning honey production is neither the most sustainable, nor efficient, nor ethical measure to ensure the protection of bees as a species. Now, let's start with a few definitions. So, beekeepers are any individual managing and monitoring the upkeep of a beehive maintained for commercial purposes. The production of honey is any form of apiculture aimed at making a financial gain. And banning is legally prohibiting the production of honey in all honey products, making no differentiation between naturally and ethically produced honey and those production processes that engage in harmful practices. So, now I'm going to prove this through 3 constructives. The first being that natural modern honey production is an already inherently ethical process, and these unethical practices that side proposition has mentioned at length are completely separate from it. Now, side proposition is coming up here and told you a horror story of beekeeping, but we're here to refute that and show you that this only represents the individual inhumane decisions of a small portion of beekeepers and cannot be generalized for the entire sector. Now, in natural modern beekeeping, the bees are free to move around and leave at any time, which means beekeepers must create a comfortable environment for the bees to stay in the hive, and the hives are movable and open. So these individual voluntary practices that are seen as unethical, that can be de-incentivized, that can be replaced, that can be regulated, form the entirety of side proposition's argument, and they're not a natural part of the beekeeping process. Now let's look at the basics of beekeeping. Bees aren't harmed and don't die in the natural production of honey. They naturally produce an excess of it, and they don't sustain any injury from it. There is no inherent cruelty in the production and extraction of honey. Now, bee cultures are in fact the only domesticated livestock that can arguably consent to being part of the honey production process, because the queen stays in the hive because she feels that it's a good place for the hive for the rest of the bees to leave. So if she leaves, the entire hive will leave. And if it's an open space, then they only stay if it is a very comfortable place for them to stay. And to rebut any idea that beekeepers are cruel, I'll remind you that beekeepers are naturally incentivized by profit to protect bees from dying early, getting injured, or getting sick, because logically sick and dying bees means less honey and less profit. There is already a mechanism in place to protect bees, but this blanket ban will only have a harmful effect on bee populations and the livelihoods of beekeepers. Now, my second constructive, banning is a short-term fix that does way more harm than it does good. What this blanket ban fails to differentiate between is natural modern beekeeping and unethical practices by individuals in beekeeping. What this ban is doing is forcibly removing the entire sector of beekeeping from the economy, sacrificing livelihoods and jobs which don't engage in other unethical practices, and an entire population that consumes honey when a modern ethical alternative already exists. Now, my second speaker will talk about 2 things. Now, sorry, can I just go one more second? Side proposition has argued that there are alternatives, but we tell you that those have a larger carbon footprint, and that if they're willing to sacrifice that in the name of environmentalism, then it is inherently illogical. The third constructive, which my second speaker will go on to talk about, is that beekeeping helps in conservation of species as a whole, and there is an alternative model of reform. Okay, thank you. We're very proud to oppose.
Yeah, thank you, speaker. That was 2 minutes, 46 seconds.
Okay, who is the next speaker from Srishti?
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, please let me know when to start.
Yeah, okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Greetings to the House at large. The motion for today is that this House believes that the production of honey is unethical and should be banned. We at Side Proposition believe that this is a slowly and ever-expanding anthropocentric world where every resource available is being grossly misused by the greed of human beings. Side Opposition gave a very utopian version of the world wherein the bees are allowed to move around freely and the excess of honey is only collected. Let me tell you, this method which they have mentioned is quite inefficient and is a time-wasting process and is not profitable for the producer at all. Therefore, it is opted out of quite often. Side opposition, also mentioned the fact that the queen bee is the head of the colony and every other bee follows her. What side opposition failed to mention was that the queen bee's wings are often clipped off and she is made to stay in the hive itself. Therefore, the honey collecting process is made easier. Going on to my constructors. Honey extraction is a profit-driven process where the welfare of the bees is often secondary to commercial gains. Pollinating 1/3 of the food we eat, a significant loss in the bee population is a real and present danger right now. This is an environmental debate which side opposition has blatantly ignored. In 2018 alone, the US consumed 555 million pounds of honey, which was sourced mainly from India, leading to a rise in global carbon emissions. In commercial hives, though, honey is extracted in autumn, just as the bees are preparing to hunker down for the winter, essentially robbing them of their food source for the toughest months of the year. To stop the bees from dying of starvation, they are fed artificial sweeteners, which have very little nutritional value, which has been observed to weaken the bees' immune system, contributing to the decline in population, which adds to the endangered state, which is why the extreme word ban was used in the motion, and which is why we propose it. The burden on side opposition side was to prove that honey is extremely beneficial for human health and no other replacements are available, which they have failed to engage with and therefore prove. After calibrating all the points mentioned by a respectable opposition, we, the proposition, have been assured that our stance not only encompasses the moral, ethical, and most importantly, environmental consequences of this activity. Therefore, we at Side Proposition have taken this debate. Very, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. That was 2 minutes, 25 seconds. Who's the next speaker from Sagar?
It's me. Just give me a second. Just a second.
Sure.
Cool.
Just let us know when you're ready. Okay.
3, 2, 1. So now, side proposition has essentially come here and they have refused to clash in the debate at all. They've not managed to either justify or like even show us how a ban would be a tenable or even a required solution here, right? They've refused to clash at all, only going on about a few practices rather than taking the practice as a whole, which is what would be required to justify a ban, right? Now, side prop has come here and argued that there are alternatives to honey. But in fact, the carbon footprint of other alternative sweeteners is much larger than that of honey. And to quote a statistic here, right? So for each kilogram of honey that is produced, it only takes between 0.17 and 0.48 kgs of carbon dioxide. Per kg of carbon dioxide, it only takes 0.17 to 0.48 kgs of honey being produced. Whereas for corn, which is the next most common sugar alternative, corn syrup, it takes 1.6 kgs, and this is not even taking into account the processing, the transportation, and such. This is only in producing corn as compared to honey. Furthermore, this clearly proves that proposition has not been able to argue that the environment, livelihoods, and entire sector of the economy should be sacrificed in a blanket ban when reform and regulation is a much better alternative. Beekeeping is a novel effort in reviving bee population, which are dwindling. Right. So here we are using incentives to make them sustain their populations. The pesticides that are mentioned by proposition, these affect bees more in the wild. So when we are protecting them to ensure our profit, they are being protected from these pesticides, right? So their populations are being sustained, and as a species, they are being more ethically treated because their sustenance is being ensured. Now, what side prop will come here and what they could have proposed, and they didn't even do this, is that conservation programs can do the same thing, right? So let's just take it in good faith that this is something that they were assuming they wanted to do. These are they completely require funding from the public, which is not sustainable since they're not infinite sinks, right? The public is not an infinite sink to continue honey production. So therefore, giving profit as an incentive ensures that they will be sustained much more than any such conservation program. Now, lastly, we're proposing an alternative model of reform, right? We don't want a ban, we want reform. So we are ensuring the welfare of each and every single colony. Letting bees engage in natural swarming practices, naturally brood and build their own honeycombs, grow biodiverse plants rather than give them sweeteners, which is also counteracted by current measures which are already in place, such as ensuring fructose and glucose levels that are similar to wild honey. And so furthermore, even preventing of artificial insemination of bee queens and clipping their wings. This is something so easily regulatable, right? So we can just have checks and balances rather than banning the thing as a whole. So therefore, regulation is the only way
Speaker,
forward.
please note you've already overshot your time.
Sorry, just one last point. We would also incentivize organic honey production, which is already prevalent in certain indigenous tribes, such as the Bar tribe in Meghalaya. So therefore, opposition believes that reform is the only way forward, and bees and humans can have a symbiotic relationship in the production of honey rather than having to be antagonists. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. Please note that was 3 minutes 40 seconds.
Okay, thank you, speakers. The floor is now open to questions. Side proposition can ask first.
The opposition stated that only a small percentage of beekeepers use unethical means to harvest honey. How can they say this when there is a burden of 555 million plus pounds of honey required in the United States every year, and that is impossible to harvest in the springtime, which is considered by side opposition as the ethical harvesting time?
Wait, could you repeat your question once?
Yeah, my network kind of went off.
Okay, so basically the question is, you said that bees, there's an ethical period, but how do you justify that where 555 million plus pounds of honey is required in the US every year, which cannot be harvested in that springtime, which you guys say is the ethical period?
See, essentially, what we're talking about in this debate is moving it away from unethical practices and towards natural and modern practices, right? And you can do this by incentivizing through lowering taxes. You can do this by subsidizing it. So what we're saying is that this is a sustainable form of production. It can be done long term, and it is already being done long term in several countries, as we showed you in our examples.
Thank you, side opposition, if you have any questions.
Okay.
Right, wait. Can I go? Obviously. Yeah. So, right, I think in the first line of the primary speaker's proposition, they came in here and said that human greed is one of the biggest issues in this matter, right? So, the question I would like to pose to you is, how would banning be more beneficial to the bees, considering this human greed, seeing that when it's not banned, we have regulations in place, and unregulated honey production will be even worse for ethically for the bees in view of this human greed.
Okay, so what I understand from that question is why you're asking why a ban is better than reformation. Is that right?
Yeah, fine,
Yeah.
concisely, that's it.
Okay, fine. So bees are already an endangered species under the Endangered Animals Act, and that's why we feel it's imperative that a complete ban is put, because they are soon to be extinct. So you need very immediate action right now, and not slow steps towards a better sort of end conclusion. So that's why the extreme, I even said it in my speech, the extreme word ban is being used because of this reason.
No, please, to follow up.
No, sorry. Judges, your questions.
Anything, ma'am?
I think you go ahead, Parth.
Okay. So on to Shrishti, like the previous speaker stated, and I like the question that they had, where they said greed being a non-negotiable or something that is not something that is variable in this equation. The fact is, demand for honey will still exist, and as we have seen through multiple debates, in fact, in this competition, the the tendency of individuals with the purchasing power, people that can afford it, will consume honey no matter how they get it. So considering that a complete ban on ethical practices, as you stated, because ethical practices would also be banned, how do you protect the ethical interests of bees when the alternative will imply that people will still go to get honey, except there is no regulation that still exists.
Could you condense your question in one line, please?
People will still want honey. Ethical practices are also being banned. How are you going to protect the bees?
Okay, fine. So, 1 second. Yeah. So ethical practices, I think I mentioned that in the starting of my speech, ethical practices is very inefficient for the producer himself because of the time consuming process, as side opposition had mentioned. So I feel like that's a very small portion of the entire production area. And as my first speaker had also mentioned, maple syrup and other artificial sweeteners are what's the word? Are a sort of alternative for honey itself. So I feel like if you ban honey as a whole, people will slowly source towards the other alternatives.
Thank you. And to side opposition, my question is, Shrishti has come up and questioned you very correctly when you say that ethical practices may still be implemented. Shrishti has asked why you believe that, number one, people in large amounts even follow these practices in the first place, and how you think demand can be sustained owing to the inefficient manner of these ethical practices.
I'd
Okay,
like.
you want to take it?
Urvashi, you can go. You can go. It's fine.
Okay, so your first part of the question, I believe, was why would people follow these practices? So our last constructive in our alternative model of reform, we talked about enforcing restrictions on the size and density of beehives. We talked about de-incentivizing by lowering taxes, by providing government grants, which has successfully been implemented in several parts of the world. And we remind you that on their side of the world, there is no honey at all. The only alternative is one that has a larger carbon footprint. So in our side of the world, what we're arguing is that reforming and regulating is a better alternative than completely banning, because then the people's demands are still being met. In their side of the world, the demands are not being met at all, and the alternative is actually worse for the environment than what we're suggesting. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, speakers. We will go to.
Can I ask my question now? All right. So I have a question for Sagar. We're talking about, honey. You've been talking about how honey has been, how these beehives and how these professionals take care, and how they are, taking measures to prevent honey and the bees and all of that, and how they're taking care of things. How about the unethical way of the non-professionals, maybe in certain sectors where they are not being protected, but because that's an easy and cheaper source of sweetener for certain people in small villages in India and other places where they don't have an entire setup and they want to take a shot at this thing. How about those people? So is that not what you would support?
Ma'am,
or how would you
sorry
like
to interject, but judges were only allowed to ask one question, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
All right. I am so sorry. I did not know that. I thought we could ask. All right.
Apologies, Kamaljeet, ma'am.
Answering it, if that's all right, if that's okay with the system.
Let's not take away the time because it's past the time already. So that's fine.
Welcome back, judges. We will now hear the verdict of the debate.
Okay, thank you everyone. That was a really interesting debate. I think it was well done from both teams. So we have the judges have come to a conclusion. It was a unanimous decision, and the winner of this debate is Shrishti. We feel that Shrishti gave a more holistic approach to the debate, and they covered a lot of points, went into detail. Nothing was that I think Sagar could watch on is that they went quite a bit on the time on the last speech. I think it's a bit more than almost 2 minutes. So I think then Farhat and Kamaljeet ma'am can add some extra points.
Yeah, and that heart-wrenching verdict, because I do belong to Sagar House. It was a tough call, but rather, actually, I should be clear. I think Shrishti had a clear victory. It was in a close debate. I feel that they did a lot of justice to their side, and they had some of the highest scores in matter and content over the tournament. So going into specifics, the clashes that came up over the debate, they were twofold. The main clash, the main meat of the debate was how modern beekeeping is majorly being conducted. And I feel like Sagar lived in this world where, ethical alternatives are still an option and those can be harvested. But in an example brought up very well by Kamaljeet ma'am during our judges feedback, was that, I mean, you're not considering the people that are burning hives at the sides of the road just to sell them on highways, etc., which is how the informal sector is contributing to most of the honey production. It's not the formal sector. So that's why we felt that since this wasn't considered, also Ryan's point about how honey extraction had the other alternatives also had carbon footprints. We will talk more about that, but we looked at not just the carbon footprint, but also the alternatives to carb. It's not just the carbon footprint that we're considering. Shrishti did a great job of explaining the crucial role that bees play in the environment, not just limited to the pollination, the sweetener production, but also the how they produce, I mean, 2/3 or 1/3 of the entire food, pollination, etc. Finally, I'd say the burdens and the that Shrishti threw on the debate classified what went right for them and what went wrong for Sagar, which was that they said on proposition what they had to prove was the other sweeteners are not unethical, and opposition had to prove that there is no better alternative. Through the course of the debate, I heard nothing about alternatives from Sagar about why there is nothing else that can be taken in place of this honey, which as a substitute, and that's why it was a clear victory, as again heart wrenching as that might be. So good job to both houses, and thank you for that debate.
Thank you so much, Parth and Veer, for your feedback. And I think that was quite a comprehensive feedback. But yes, congratulations to both the teams, because reaching here is also quite commendable. And you have done a great job. And I think both the teams debated very well. However, as mentioned, I think most of the points have been covered by the other two judges. There's one more suggestion that I'd like to give to the Sagar House. And when you speak, you are supposed to, when you begin your speech, the second speech and the third has to be taken from, you have to take some points from the proposition or your team and then begin your speech, which I found was lacking in Sagar House. So I think this is something that you must take note of. And only then can you speak with conviction. Also, when you're speaking, there are a lot of other things that you need to keep in mind other than the content which has already been shared. You need to be specific about, cover up a larger part of your speech. So I think that is what you should be doing. Rest, I think everything was, both the teams spoke very well. It was a good debate. We enjoyed ourselves, at least I did. The topic was quite interesting. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, judges. We really appreciate the feedback given. Congratulations to both the houses. It was a great debate. And yeah.
Thank you. Congratulations,
Thank you so much.
Well done. We hope you enjoyed watching that debate. As you saw, Himgiri came in 4th place, Vasundhara in 3rd, Sagar 2nd, and Srishti in 1st place. Congratulations to all houses.
The second Interhouse event was Shark Tank Innovation. This event was completely new and had never been done before. Each house team consisted of 4 members, and they were assigned an SDG, according to which they had to come up with a business plan and pitch it to the judges, keeping in mind their respective sustainable development goal.
Srishti was assigned SDG 11, which was Sustainable Cities and Communities. Sagar was assigned SDG 12, which was Responsible Consumption and Production. Vasundhara was assigned SDG 6, which was Clean Water and Sanitation. And Himgiri was assigned SDG 7, which was Affordable and Clean Energy.
As far as results are concerned, we had a unanimous decision wherein Vasundhara and Himgiri tied for third place, Shrishti came in second, and Sagar was first. Congratulations to all the houses, they all did a great job.
We sincerely hope that you enjoyed watching this event that we worked so hard to plan. This event could not be possible without our hardworking teachers, Amrita Mitra ma'am, Maitri Samadar ma'am, and Preeti Chopra ma'am. Thank you all so much.
We would like to thank our environment reps as they had a great contribution towards making this week a huge success. Thank you for tuning in with us today, and we hope to see you participate in Environment Week next year. Thank you.